right, so we're talking about pace, we're talking about goals and sort of where we're going. So we're going to have a conversation about that. And then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience as well. So always good to keep everyone on their toes. So I want to start off by just ask you a little bit about this idea of goals and goal setting and timing. So we have some really powerful and important goals now in the state of Hawaii. And we've been a leader, I think, in goal setting. And I'm curious sort of how you see the next steps. What are the structures or resources that we need to put in place from here now that we know where we want to go?
Well, I think it's a couple things I think that becomes very important. And I really do think that the goal setting was very, very important, especially in the context of if you are thinking about how to transform or heal our community as we move to the next level, it really is not something that happens overnight. And clearly because of that need for focused, continuous efforts, putting these goals in legislation of some sort, I think really helps the community to really understand and then make decisions as we go along about why it's important and why we need to move forward together. So, I do think that this process that started 10 years ago to be audacious and really commit to a different kind of energy, a different kind of economic, really a different community that started 10 years ago. I think we're getting 10 years into the program. We are starting to talk about the next set of goals, really moving, I think, from energy to carbon, I think is really the appropriate next step. As you know, we passed in this session a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2045. Again, I think that really demonstrates that it's more than just electricity. It really is about the entire energy ecosystem. And I think that really, once again, it was unanimous support from the legislature. Once again, I think the community gets it, that really is the natural evolution of that goal. It's about being totally carbon neutral in everything that we do.
Yeah. Excellent. What about from you, Josh? How do you sort of see the intersection of goals and then what's needed next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that we've always had goals, and we've been building structures for a long time. It was just that they were more tacit and they were organized around different principles. And I think as we've rightly come to understand the threat of climate change and what our office is focused on and what Mayor Caldwell is focused on now is we need to rapidly reorient, and we need to build radically different structures and different infrastructure for a totally different set of problems. So it is great to have those articulated for us now. And I think when you talk about the structures that need to be built, it's this is mostly traditionally we've been focused on grid, but land use and the way that land use is planned, transit-oriented development, the transportation infrastructure, which obviously all four mayors came together with Nainoa. That was a great clip from Nainoa on Hokulea to say really the Malama Honua voyage needs to continue and come off the ocean and onto land and make sure that our ground transportation system has the right structure around it. Now it's harder now. I mean we have the PUC to sort of govern the grid and energy structure. We don't have that same kind of focused group that says how do we make sure that all of our ground transportation, the thousands of cars that are out there and the miles of road and all that, it's not as unified, and so it makes it a tougher nut to crack. And I think that's why gatherings like these are really important to figure out how do we manage this broader, larger, more disparate sort of challenge structurally to make progress forward in these other two huge areas and arenas.
And Don, just to be clear, we have begun to incorporate all of the actions of state government to really focus the entire budgeting process to make sure that every department is looking at these long-term goals and objectives and beginning to integrate and into everything that they do. Budget priorities, I think, are a reflection of the broader goals that we're all committed to I know that you've heard our Department of Transportation talk about, the bigger vision of if you truly embrace this transformation, what does that mean for each and every department? And then it gets integrated into the goals and objectives of each and every department. And then the budgets begin to reflect as we build budgets at both the state and the city level, are beginning to marshal the resources to really move these systems forward. And I do think it's about not only having the goals, but about measurement. I came from Hawaii Island this morning, and following me in that presentation was Celeste Connors, and talking about the Aloha Plus Challenge as a way to publicly not only announce the goals, but then begin measurements. And it's those kinds of efforts, I think, that need to follow, so that, these goals were set by the entire community. As I said, they were embraced by everyone. And so everyone needs to be able to see where we are and what progress we've made, and they can think about what action they can take to really advance the goals.
Yeah, if I could follow on that just really quickly, I was back with Mayor Caldwell this last week in Boston, and for the Conference of Mayors. So you got like 500 mayors from all around the country that come together once a year. It's actually going to be here in Honolulu next summer, so I hope that you all will participate in what's going to be an amazing gathering. But we really we shouldn't undersell how important it is. When you think about sort of how government is structured, there's sort of this fundamental protect public health and welfare role for government. And I think the goals that we have set out really do that. They recognize the existential threat of climate change, and they've identified that. And then, the next level is these structures. Like, how do we set up, PBR is a great example of setting up the right structure to reflect the right outcomes that we want. And I really want, congratulate the legislature and Governor Ige on really pivoting from an older model to a newer model that encompasses resilience and open data and renewable energy integration and those things that will get the structure and the swimming lanes set. But then there's a third level of government that I think you touched on is show me your budget and I'll show you your values. So how does local and state government participate as a player in the market? How much renewable energy are we citing? How are we doing with our energy efficiency and tracking those metrics, and then making sure that infrastructure is there so that it's available. So, charge stations and those kind of things that we have some influence on, and build the infrastructure to enable it and not have barriers to it is another place where we can play.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about transportation for just another minute here, because I think it is really important, and it actually overtook electricity as the largest source of emissions just, I think, a year or two ago in Hawaii. So this is and it's actually going in the wrong direction, right? So emissions are going up in transportation, and they're going down in electricity. And if we do nothing, it looks like, we're going to drive 17% more in 10 years than we do today, and we're going to be emitting significantly more carbon and other pollutants into the air. So I'd love if you could just give us an example of something you're really proud of that's actually sort of aligning the budget with the values on transportation, and then maybe one other thing that you'd really like to see happen at the state and at the city and county level.
Certainly one of the things, one of the projects that we have clearly within state government is about our commitment to lead by example. And our Department of Transportation has been very focused on embracing all of the goals. A lot of it has to do with reducing, right? The one direct control item that we can is really make investments to reduce consumption. And we are committed to having Kahului Airport be the first net zero airport in the state of Hawaii, looking at reuse of water, capturing methane from the county sewage treatment plants, doing all of those things to really look at what it means. And I think the goal is 2022. And so if you were to say we're going to have something like the airport be net zero in 2022, I think most people would say it's ridiculous, right? So I do think it's about those kinds of things, about challenging the departments, and I really do believe in success spirals, right? So you have to look at what the opportunities are that really allows us to be successful in the near term, so that the rest of state government can see the example and think about what is it that I can do in my job that will make an impact for all of these goals that really moves the ball forward.
the city and the counties and the state can really play together in the same space. State roads, city roads, all integrated. Ford's here and has done a ton of work on sort of looking at, how do we transition from sort of a fuel tax model to a VMT model, but do that in a way that doesn't disincentivize where we want to go. And that's tricky. I mean, this is hard stuff. I mean, we're trying to invent stuff that hasn't been done before, but I think when you have the collaboration, we brought out, or helped bring out some of the electric buses to really, trial and test, and I think those went over to state at the airport to, sort of look at what's the model for the rental car shuttle there. And so we can really leverage each other to bring these new solutions in. And, in terms of, budget and values, I think in the city budget that just passed, we've got over a dozen, I think we have over a dozen electric buses in there. So we're, it's time to start moving the fleet. The mayors have made a commitment to get to 2045 and, decarbonize ground transportation. And and lead by example, and by 2035, make sure our city fleets are decarbonized. That means we need to start now because, these buses, the mechanics out at the bus yard are amazing. Those guys keep buses going for way longer than Gillig says they should be running on our streets. That's a great thing, right? That's less, waste and metal and fuel and all that kind of thing over time. Not fuel, although materials go in the bus. But what that means is, we buy a bus now, it's going to be around for 15, 18 years. So we need to start that transition now, and that's in the budget. One thing I will say that is really, I think, exciting and interesting is the introduction of this Holo card as sort of a one-tap payment system that John Nouchi and Wes Freistacke over at DTS are working on. And it really, it'll integrate rail and it'll integrate the bus in a way for people to sort of seamlessly go between transit options. There's this thing called WIM that is being deployed in Helsinki right now. And it's a company that essentially says, you pay us an amount and we are going to make sure that you can go wherever you need to go without a car. Right? So it works on bike share, it works on Uber, it works on Lyft, it works on the train, it works on the bus. And that's where we really want to go, is how do we harness the power of tech to get to a place where transportation is a service and we can shed the burden of $10,000 to $14,000 a year of having to keep a car up, when really all you want to do is move around. You want to get to where you need to go door to door. And I think really this Holo card is potentially the entree to do something like WIM for an island ecosystem across transit.
Yeah, it's incredibly important for equity because the people who actually pay the most to get to work are people who can least afford it. And if you actually look sort of maps of the islands, and particularly on Oahu, you can see that housing plus transportation is just a much larger share of income. So people always forget about transportation costs when they think about the high cost of housing and sort of affordable housing here. So it's a holistic solution, I think. I want to pick up on that too, because I'm interested in this idea of, technology is moving very fast. We've seen this happen sort of across Hawaii and across the world. There's lots of examples. And I'm curious about your thoughts of how you actually build agility into the system. So knowing that we don't actually know what the solutions are that people are going to be using with transportation as a service 5 years from now, how do we ensure that government is helping design for agility and for change?
What I talk about in the cabinet is the whole notion of flexibility and really embracing change. I try to support in the directors really the risk-taking that needs to occur so that, there are employees who feel empowered to try something different in order to see whether it would work. I do think that is a tremendous requirement. If government can't be flexible, then it will never be able to keep up with the pace of change that is occurring in our communities. And Josh talked a little bit about, if you look at that transportation system of the future, and it's made up of rail and buses and Lyft or some transport vehicles, and you do have a way to go however, wherever, that really is the ideal utopia, right, that would be displayed. And it's obvious some portions are more efficient than others, but it's really getting away from the transportation system that all of us have lived up, which is really the individual car that we all decide when and how and where we're going to go independently and without regard to what the impact is on the planet, to a transportation system that really lets us live our lives in a way that you can get from point A to point B, and you don't need to totally control and pay for how to get there, right? I mean, that's where we want to be.
So, I mean, as people are experimenting in government and in the cabinet, what do you do if they fail? How do you ensure that failure is not sort of the end?
Well, I mean, I think, it is about supporting people and really standing up for them when something doesn't work. I think it's about creating that environment that allows people, and I believe in success spirals, and I really do believe that when something doesn't go right, then that's the time for a leader to step up and take responsibility, so that you don't get that situation where a public servant is afraid to take action or afraid to do something different because they don't want to be blamed for it. So, I mean, I think it really is creating that environment that allows them to trust and know that if they do something different and it works great, then I'm happy to celebrate them and celebrate the employees for being bold and innovative. And if it doesn't, then that's where I think a leader needs to step forward and take responsibility.
How about city and county? Can you fail at city and county?
Well, I think we do a little bit of that every day, but that's how you do it. You fail forward, right? I mean, if you don't take some risks, you're not going to. I mean, maybe your clip of Zootopia is really the transportation, ecosystem future that you want to see. Where, and I think that folks are trying their best. What's important is that we need to know we can't fail at the big level, right? We can't have huge sunk costs. We have to set the overall goals and parameters and outline, here's what we want to see, and not make a wrong choice around sort of, sunk costs and the wrong system. We're getting there, right, with the goals that have been set out. But I think it's important to enable folks to fail within the swimming lanes that you've set up. But I think it's better if it's the private sector that's trying that rather than us. And so I think if there's delicate ways for the city and county to set up some parameters, and I'm thinking about, you guys have seen it all in the news with the scooters coming in and being, dropped on the streets. Cities all across the nation are facing this sort of conundrum around, folks really want this last mile solution, but it can't cause pandemonium for everybody and block sidewalks and do all the things that we have to be in charge of public welfare. So what's that delicate balance where you can set up a playground and rules, and then let them experiment within that, and then let the market decide which ones are in and which ones are out. There are folks that are, there's dockless systems and the scooters and everything else, but they have to have some ground rules in order to make sure that the whole endeavor doesn't fail.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting thing. I think you folks have heard me talk about this before, and one of the things we're really interested in is what does the front door look like for innovation? What's the front door for a new idea? If you want to come in and provide a new last mile solution like scooters, who do you talk to? Actually, where do you go in the state or city? And how do we make that much more agile and understandable so that we can be receptive to these kinds of new ideas?
I think we're getting better at that. A lot of this stuff is happening so fast, and it tests the bounds of the old traditional systems that have been set up. I mean, you look at Airbnb, and that has, shook the market in terms of, but people demand it, right? And so I think there was a model that was sort of developed within the city and county of Honolulu, and Mayor Caldwell put together sort of an eclectic task force to look at, how do we get the best of this and prevent the worst of it? Because we know it can kill neighborhoods, right? But there are good things that come out of this. And I think that model would likely get adopted for the last mile transit piece too. How do we set the ground rules? Here's the spaces you can play in. Here's the financials that we want to see, and make sure that there's regulatory or some permitting and licensing, so it's not wild, wild west. But that everybody can agree to as a baseline to then enter the market. So it takes a while to get your muscles built. These are atrophied muscles around, this is stuff that we haven't encountered before. But, we're developing those systems internally for people to have a place to talk about these.
Yes, I do think, and you can see, I mean, technology is just transforming everything, every industry that you can imagine. And I think the challenge for government entities is really how do we change government to be as agile? Obviously, we won't ever be as agile as the private sector is, but how do you create an environment for government to respond? As Josh said, you know, can we define the safe havens, right? What are the parameters that we would want to assure in order to make sure that our community benefits from those kinds of investments? And how do we create flexibility where it needs to be flexible so these new ideas and these transformative technologies can really benefit the community in the best way possible?
I think it's important to remember we should never be as agile. Our whole point is to protect the general public and welfare, and so we should always be a caution and a protective sort of hand and cloak on that. But we do. I mean, we want that innovation. We want it to happen. It's just what are the different roles?
Yeah, we're going to close up here in just a moment, and I also want to say from the government perspective, part of the thing, and give a shout out to what you folks are doing with Bert and the broadband, is actually creating that enabling infrastructure so that things can play. And I think that something that this kind of community should really be thinking about, like we have broadband, we have some of these like sort of rules around mobility. What are the other sort of basic sort of underlying structures that are needed in our community to make sure we can take advantage of the next level of technology in the way that we get the upsides and also manage the downsides? So I'll give you one chance for one word or phrase at the very end. Josh, we'll start with you and finish with the governor. What's one thing you could use help with?
Engagement. I mean, I think as we go from the goals to the how do these structures get set up? What are the policies? What's the minutia of detail? That's all going to be worked out in budgetary processes. It's going to be worked out, sort of street to street battles around, do we have bike lanes? Do we have infrastructure? And those things are worked out in the daily fray. And so engage at the local government level, and then also help us de-risk, I think, the data and the technology. If everybody's encouraging us to fail, when we do, come out and write a letter to the editor saying, hey, at least they tried, or say, we think there was some potential there and at least they were shooting for it. Because I think if there's not a response back from the community, especially this community, which is so engaged on like changing the ecosystem, it really makes it tough for us to do. And I would just say to close, Kumuhina, who was on the last panel, if you haven't seen the movie Kumuhina, go check it out, because we're talking about change and doing hard things and busting people out of automotive patterns they've used for years. Her life and her story talks about being at the point of a tip of a spear and taking change and taking it on the nose and not being afraid. And so I think it's a perfect example of, from 10 years ago to today, how do you embrace change and take it on and turn people's perspective.
That's great.
I would say the same thing. It really is about engagement. And I would say this, I think the government structures have been more about conflict than real engagement. And what I would ask everyone to get involved with is how do we create new structures for government to engage the community in real conversations? As you know, that many of these transformative technologies will require a different kind of perspective from the government, and we all need to be working together. We can do great things when we're committed and focused. I think having the long-term goals are very, very fundamentally important, but devil's in the details, right? How do we create a government that's flexible, that can engage the community in the real dialogues that need to help, that need to happen so that we can enable the best of all technologies?
Absolutely. Please join me in thanking our guests. Thank you.